አቹ ተከታታዮቼ እንግዲህ አሹ ኒውስ እንደተለመደው የተለያዩ ፕሮግራሞች ወደ እናንተ ያደርሳል። በአማርኛ ቋንቋ የበገና ዶክመንተሪ ተዘጋጅቶላችሁ ቀርቦ ነበር። ደግሞ እንግዲህ የተለያዩ የዓለም ሀገራት በገና ላይ ምን ትኩረት ያደርጋሉ የሚለውን ለማረጋገጥ እነዚህ በእንግሊዝኛ ቋንቋ የተዘጋጁ የበገና ታሪክ እንዲቀርብላችኋል።
Jewish temple lyres played by the Levites in the Temple of Jerusalem. Incredibly, according to Ethiopian tradition, the begina is often referred to as King David's harp. And according to the same tradition, it was introduced to Ethiopia in biblical times by King Menelik I, along with the actual Ark of the Covenant, which according to the same tradition is still housed in Ethiopia in the Chapel of Axum. And amazingly, according to the same tradition, Menelik I was none other than the son of King Solomon himself and the Ethiopian Queen of Sheba. Throughout the text of the Hebrew Bible, as well as in the writings of the 1st century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, there were two main types of biblical lyre played by the Levites to accompany the singing of the Levitical choir during the ancient temple services in Jerusalem. These were the 10-string kinnor and the 12-string nevel. Now, exactly like the Ethiopian begina, all the evidence suggests that the nevel of biblical times was a bass register instrument. Indeed, according to the early rabbinical text known as the Mishnah, the biblical nevel had thicker strings, and these were made of sheep's large intestines, whereas the kinnor's thinner strings were made from small intestines of sheep. Another tantalising clue to the hypothesis that the nevel was a bass register lyre also comes from the number of nevels which were used in comparison to the number of kinnors in the Levitical ensemble. According to the Mishnah, the use of the nevel in the Levitical ensemble was limited to, quoting, no fewer than 2 and no more than 6, whereas, quote, never fewer than 9 kinnorot and more may be added. And that comes from the Mishnah, Arak 2, line 5. This implies that the nevel provided the bass texture, over which the treble kinnors provided the melodic lines. Just as in a modern string orchestra, there are always proportionately more treble register violins compared to double basses and cellos. Also, the begina generally has a soundboard of taut leather skin. This is a gain of significance in my theory to identify the begina as a cousin, if you like, of the biblical nevel, since the Hebrew root of the word nevel is nev, literally meaning animal skin or carcass. Further evidence in my attempt at identifying the begina to the biblical nevel can also be deduced from the playing style itself. According to the observations by the 1st century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who actually witnessed the Levitical ensemble play in the temple during the 1st century, the nevel was always played with the fingers, whereas the kinnor was played with the plectrum. That comes from Josephus's writings in his book Antiquities. Amazingly, the begina is always played with the fingers, just like the biblical nevel. The only slight catch to my theory is what of the 12 strings that Josephus mentions were the original configuration of the biblical nevel. Because the modern begina has 10 strings, like the biblical kinnor. This anomaly, however, can be explained by a biblical reference to another type of nevel, in Hebrew known as the nevel azor. This name literally means a nevel with 10 strings. Now, if this hypothesis is true, then the Ethiopian begina therefore could quite literally be described as the biblical nevel azor, unchanged in almost 3,000 years. A fascinating possibility. And yet there is more circumstantial evidence to support this. There is tantalising phonetic correlation between the ancient Hebrew word for melody and psalm with the Ethiopian word for song. The Hebrew word for melody is zema, And this is obviously derived from the root of the word, obviously derived from the root of this word is the Hebrew word for psalm, which is mizmor. It is indeed a fascinating fact then that the Ethiopian word for song is mezmor. Now both these words sound strikingly onomatopoeic. Just maybe the reason the Hebrew words for melody and psalm sound the way they do is that the actual words zemer and mizmor sound like the buzzing of the gut strings as they would have sounded on the original ancient biblical lyres. Exactly the same distinctive buzzing timbre that is the main characteristic of the Ethiopian begina, still played in sacred Ethiopian music today. Indeed, the flatter bent-shaped bridges most commonly depicted on almost all illustrations of ancient lyres suggest that some sort of subtle buzzing quality similar to the sitar was common to the timbre of most of the actual lyres of antiquity. The buzzing quality of strings is associated with this type of bridge in contrast to the clean harp-like tone produced by a more modern A-shaped pointed bridge found on, say, a modern guitar. I am therefore almost certain that it is more than likely that the original biblical lyres also had this hypnotic buzzing timbre. This fascinating phonetic correlation between the Hebrew and Ethiopian words for melody, song and psalm to me reinforces the circumstantial evidence for an ancient musical connection going back to biblical times between the music of ancient Israel and Ethiopia. Now, whatever the facts or fiction in the Ethiopian tradition of Menelik I being the son of King Solomon and the Ethiopian Queen of Sheba, let alone all the other tradition about the location of the Ark of the Covenant in the Chapel of Aksum in Ethiopia, there certainly seems to be more facts than fiction in the ever-growing grains of evidence, circumstantial as it may be, as I have so far explored. However it might have actually happened to me, I am now almost certain that somehow the ancient sound of the biblical Nevel Azor, once played in the ancient Temple of Jerusalem, can still be heard today, amazingly preserved since biblical times in the enchanting, exotic, buzzing timbre of the Ethiopian begina.
Rasamaኝ አምላኬ rasamaኝ ፈጣሪ rasamaኝ አምላኬ rasamaኝ ፈጣሪ አላገኘምህና ያለ አንተ መሐሪ rasamaኝ ፈጣሪ አድነኝ ጌታ